happening.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some very natural things that ought to be happening here.
Right.
I kind of had that in mind in mentioning the sit-down strikes in the 30s, which were terrifying to the business world. I mean, that's what set it off. And that's just what should be happening now. In fact, takeover of factories. So what's going on now is kind of surreal. If you go to, say, the Midwest, Obama pretty much owns General Motors. Okay, what he's doing is closing down GM plants. At the same time, his transportation secretary, Roy LaHood, is being sent to Spain and France to use federal stimulus money to contract with, say, the Spanish to produce high-speed rail facilities, which could be produced in those GM plants, saving the communities, saving the workforce, producing things we need, but not good for the banks. Well, there should be a reaction to this, and it's obvious what the reaction should be. They should take over the plants. That requires a lot of support, public support. Now, to an extent, it's happening. I don't have time for the details, but if you look up Gar Alperovitz's work on the internet, you can find it. He has a website in which he, I forget what it's called, workerowership.org or some such thing, which is full of examples of things like this. Community-owned, worker-owned factories, usually on a pretty small scale, but growing, and it could be a popular movement which could really change things. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Export, of course.
What was that author again? One more time.
Gar Alperovitz, A-L-P-E-R-O-V-I-T-Z. If you drop me a note, I'll give you the exact reference. Now, about the nuclear proliferation, that's a very significant fact. And it would be very nice if the Obama administration were opposed to it. Unfortunately, it's in favor of it. There's all kind of talk about banning it, but just take a look. Actually, one way to reduce nuclear proliferation is to establish nuclear weapons-free zones. Okay, it doesn't get rid of everything, but it reduces it. Well, there are several. So Africa, just after many years, agreed to have a nuclear weapons-free zone over Africa. But there's one impediment. The U.S. won't agree. They won't agree because there's an island in the Indian Ocean, Diego Garcia, which is part of Africa, and the U.S. uses it for storing nuclear weapons and for bombing. It's the central base for bombing the Middle East. The Obama administration just sent a submarine tender there to take care of new nuclear submarines. They just sent what are called bunker busters, the biggest bomb in the arsenal, to meant for Iran, sent them there. That ends the African nuclear weapons-free zone. There's a nuclear weapons-free zone in the South Pacific, almost. The U.S. won't permit it because it uses specific islands, which it owns, for storage of nuclear weapons and for passage of nuclear submarines and servicing them and so on. So that one's missing. The most important one is the Middle East. I mean, we're supposed to be concerned about Iran. Okay, maybe should be, maybe not. But they don't have nuclear weapons. But there happen to be 3 states that never signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. India, Pakistan, and Israel. All of them developing nuclear weapons very extensively and with our assistance. Okay, now one way to do something about this would be to establish a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. Doesn't do everything, but it would mitigate, perhaps eliminate whatever potential threat Iran is supposed to pose, and it would reduce nuclear weapons in a very significant area. Well, the U.S. is formally committed to that, strongly committed, in fact, more than other countries. When the U.S. and Britain invaded Iraq, they tried to provide a kind of a thin legal cover for it. And what they did was appeal to a Security Council resolution from 1991 which demanded that Iraq eliminate its weapons of mass destruction. Well, you know the rest of that story. But one part of that resolution said that the signers are committed to establishing a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. Well, okay, that had two problems with that. It includes Israel, and it includes U.S. forces deployed there. Big problem. You take a look at the Wall Street Journal a couple of days ago. They had a big article on the pressure coming from the Middle East countries, Egypt and others, to try to get the U.S. to press for a nuclear weapons-free zone in the region in advance of the conference on nuclear security that's coming up. And it quoted the nice platitudes from the Obama administration, you know, saying, great idea, let's do it. But if you look closely, there are specific reservations. Doesn't apply to Israel. That's in there a couple of times. Well, you can't have a nuclear weapons-free zone if the biggest nuclear power in the region, the U.S. client, is exempted. So that's more problems with nuclear proliferation. India just announced that it can produce weapons at the yield of the superpowers. That's with U.S. aid. India was immediately informed by the Obama administration that the Security Council resolutions banning that don't apply to India. This is last September. Around the same time, the International Atomic Energy Agency passed a resolution calling on Israel to open up its facilities to join the Non-Proliferation Treaty, open up its facilities to inspection. Europe and the United States tried to block the resolution, but it passed over their opposition. The Obama administration immediately informed Israel that it didn't apply to them. That was actually reported in the United States in one newspaper, the Moody newspaper, the Washington Times, literally. I don't think the Indian one was even reported anywhere. Well, yeah, if you're opposed to nuclear proliferation, there are things you can do.
What should we do?
Should we do? We should form an anti-nuclear movement, like the Committee for Sane Nuclear Policy, and CND, and the anti-nuclear movement of the early 80s, which was huge. But first we have to know it, you know. Like you can't let it be stuck in the Washington Times. People have to know about it so they can do something about it. And yes, you're right, it's extremely important. That's one of the two fundamental dangers to the survival of the species. The other is the environmental crisis, and nothing's being done about that either. So if you care about your grandchildren, there's pretty obvious things to do.
And there are meetings
Thank
all
you
over
so much.